Good evening and welcome to the FY2022 Operating Budget Community Forum. This evening we'll be having the forum via FCPS television, and we will be taking comments via phone. If you'd like to provide a comment or feedback regarding tonight's presentation, please call for English 301-696-6966 and for Spanish 240-236-8769. We will also be taking emails throughout the evening at fcps.budget@fcps.org. My name is Heather Clayball, and I'm the Budget Officer for Frederick County Public Schools. We're going to begin this evening with a brief overview of the operating budget process. Tonight's agenda will include the overview of the FY21 operating budget, how FCPS receives our funding, how we determine our expenses, what's next for the FY22 budget, important dates, and then we'll be responding to any questions that come in. Our operating budget for FY21 totaled $674 million. The budget is generally divided into two parts: unrestricted, which totaled $584 million, and restricted, which totaled $90 million. The restricted funds are generally grants provided by federal, state, and local entities. We also present other budgets throughout the year: our school construction fund, our food and nutrition services fund, the self-insurance fund, artificial turf, student activity, and OPEB, other post-employment benefits fund. Our funding is received predominantly from four sources: our local government, Frederick County. We receive 45.9% of our funding. From the state, we receive 46.5% of our funding. We also receive some federal funding. The predominantly federal funds come via grants, and then we receive other funds through things like facility rentals, our fund balance, and those type of items. How do we spend our money? As you would imagine, we're a people-rich organization, and the majority of our funds are spent on salary and wages. We spend $399 million on salary and wages. We also spend money on contracted services, supplies and materials, our other charges, and included in this are the benefits for our staff, equipment, and then transfers. 85.4% of our total budget is spent on salary and benefits. How does FCPS receive funds? Our funding is based upon our actual enrollment. We refer to it as our September 30th count, but actually we're counting throughout the entire month of September. And so since our funding is from our actual enrollments and our expenses are from our projected enrollments, we always have what we refer to as lagging funding. We also receive some additional funds based upon subgroups. Those subgroups provide funds from state aid, and they include our students who receive free and reduced meals, our English learners, and our students with disabilities. These actual enrollments are used to establish approximately 92.4% of our FCPS revenues. From the Frederick County government, we are required by Maryland law to receive maintenance of effort, which means there's a per pupil calculation, and every year, if we add a student, we add exactly that per pupil allocation. Fortunately, over the past few years, our county government has seen fit to provide us with additional above maintenance of effort funding. And in FY21, we received $7 million above maintenance of effort. Maryland provides its funding predominantly through our state aid funding formula, which is based upon predominantly our actual enrollments and the subgroup enrollments. We also have received in the past few years Blueprint for Maryland's Future funding. You may have heard about this if you follow educational funding. It's also been referred to as the Kerwin funding. In the past few years, we received approximately $8 to $9 million for those very specific items within the Blueprint for Maryland's Future. That was the beginning of that blueprint. In FY2022, we were supposed to begin the much larger Blueprint for Maryland's Future. It was vetoed by the governor in last May, and the legislature may be considering overriding the veto when the legislative session opens in January. We'll have to stay tuned to see how that works out. So how do we build our budget? Well, we use our base budget as our foundation. So we take all of the budget expenditures that we had planned for in FY21, and then we look to see what's changed. Typically, we focus on our projected enrollments, and that helps us to establish our school-based staffing. And when we staff for the school, it not only means we're staffing for our teachers, but we're also staffing for the administrative and support staff. We also look at other areas of growth. You may have noticed, depending upon where you live in the county, we've opened quite a few new schools. And in FY22, we will be opening Blue Heron Elementary School. So we look for those type of growth items. And that includes everything from additional square footage, so we need to increase our custodial staff, additional acreage, so we need to look at our operations and maintenance staff. So it's not simply our teaching staff, but it's what's happening throughout the organization. We also look at our mandates. As you imagine, a government-run organization receives mandates from the state of Maryland throughout the year, and we have to respond to those mandates. We're also looking at continuing the programs we have. With your own household budget, you know that items go up annually. The same thing happens at FCPS. The software we bought yesterday is more expensive than today, just like the software you've purchased at home. So we have to look at that. And then we also do have new requests that we review. Items such as, are we expanding a program? Do we need to add a new program? Is there a need throughout the county that we haven't been able to contend with? So this is quite a deliberate process that begins in October. So what's next for FY22? Well, first of all, we're looking at our revenues. And as you can imagine, as everybody's life has been impacted by COVID-19, our lives at FCPS have been impacted by COVID-19. And there is some uncertainty in our revenues based upon that impact. And so as we approach January of 2021, the governor will release his budget, and that will give us some idea of how significant the impact will be on our school budget. And the county will release their budget. Ms. Gardner, the county executive, releases her budget in April of 2021. And then we also look at the impact on enrollment on our state and county budgets. If you're from Frederick County, you know that we're growing. And we're growing by leaps and bounds. Each year the past few years, we've added approximately 1,000 students. If you think about it as a school, our new elementary schools seat 725 students. So we've been adding about a school a year. Fortunately, not all of those students are in the same location, but it's been enough of an impact that we've had to grow our number of schools. And as I stated previously, our Blueprint for Maryland's Future, will there be a veto override? If there isn't, there's a significant impact. The Blueprint for Maryland's Future was supposed to revise our state aid funding formulas. So at this point, we're just carrying forward with the same state aid funding formulas we've had for the past few years. So when we look at our revenues, we also then look at our expenditures. We use our enrollment projections to establish our staffing. We will be opening the brand-new Blue Heron Elementary School, and our Rock Creek School will be moving from the Waverly campus to our Walkersville Middle School campus. And then we also, as I stated previously, we have to look at mandates, inflationary increases, and new requests. So when does this all take place? Well, we begin the process in October. We have barely started the school year, and the budget office is already looking forward to the next fiscal year. And we do that by requesting from departments any new request. Our department managers know their budgets best, and they help us to form the budget moving forward. After we receive those requests, our cabinet reviews them. And then during December, we work to finalize the superintendent's recommended budget. That budget is released on January the 11th. On January the 13th, we sit with the board and we go through the budget, and on January 13th, it becomes the board's budget. The board then reviews the budget. On January the 20th, we spend the day with the board. They will talk to every budget manager throughout FCPS, and we will go through our budget line by line. It's also the day that the governor's budget is released, which will give us some insight into our revenues for that year from the state. On February the 3rd, we will have a public hearing. Stay tuned for details as to how that will happen. Maybe we'll be able to meet in person. On February the 10th, we then submit our budget to the county. The county has the budget and they review it. In April, the county executive announces her budget proposal and she turns it over to the county council. The county council has until May 31st to approve that budget. Fortunately, the past few years, the county council has approved FCPS's budget as it was recommended by the county executive. So now we have some time. I think now we're going to turn it over to Dr. Albin for a brief statement. If you ever have any desire to read anything about FCPS's budget, you can always visit our website. Our budget book is available there. It's a document of about 237 pages that has all the information you would ever want to know about FCPS's budget available. And if you ever have a question, you can always send it to fcps.budget@fcps.org. That comes to the budget office, and typically I answer the question, or if it's not a budget office question, we ensure that someone on the FCPS staff answers it. Dr. Albin?
Thank you, Heather. Heather always does a great job of trying to take something that is incredibly complex and make it seem as simple as possible. I'm Terry Albin, proud superintendent of Frederick County Public Schools, and I'm joined here this evening in our boardroom by our Chief Financial Officer, Leslie Pellegrino. We have members of the Public Affairs Department who will be answering your phone calls and taking comments and sharing them with us. We are also fortunate to be joined by our interpreters who are translating for us. And one of our board members actually wanted to be here tonight to experience this, and we want to welcome board member David Bass this evening, who is joining us. The purpose of this evening is to gather priorities from the community. Hopefully, as Heather was going through her presentation, a question came to your mind, and that was, do they actually put their budget together before they know how much money they're getting? And the answer is yes. And that's just kind of the nature of the game when you are a publicly funded organization. And so back in October, we also sat down with the Board of Education and we asked them, what are your priorities for the budget this year? Departments have submitted priorities. Tonight is our opportunity to hear your priorities. We will take that information, and as Heather indicated to you, we've already started to look at requests from departments. We've looked at what the board requested back in October. We're going to listen to what you have to say tonight, and we are in the process of putting together the superintendent's recommended budget. Like so many things in 2020, this is absolutely the most unusual budget year we have ever faced. Typically, when our budget office puts the budget together, they can approximate funding and the revenues that we're going to receive pretty accurately. And as we go through the process, they're constantly updating us, and we can kind of see how things are evolving. There are just a lot of things that we don't know this year, as Heather indicated, and therefore we are going to have to kind of assume things are going to stay as they've stayed, which are going to present some budget challenges for us. But more about that later. Tonight, again, we want to listen to your priorities so that we can incorporate them into the superintendent's recommended budget. And I have a feeling that some of the things you share are going to be things we've heard from our board. As we go through and listen to your request, I want you to think about something else you heard Heather talk about. There are a lot of elected officials who will be looking at and voting to approve funding or to approve this budget. So starting with our own elected Board of Education members, you are going to want to let them know what you think about the budgets that come out in January. You are going to want to let them know what you feel should be their priorities. Our county elected officials who have to approve funding and approve our budgets, your advocacy at that time will be incredibly important. And this year, advocacy at the state level is going to be extremely important for Frederick County Public Schools. Heather talked a lot about our funding being based on enrollment. This year, due to the pandemic and so much uncertainty and so many health concerns, and the question of whether or not virtual learning is right for my child, we had a lot of parents whose students were supposed to start kindergarten who took advantage of the law that says they can defer for a year if they choose to. We had a lot of families who said, for whatever reason, I'm going to homeschool now. But when you go back, I want to come back. So our September 30th enrollment was a little lower than we had projected. So if our funding is based on that enrollment, we're going to be starting in the hole when we look at our budget in January. This is not unique to Frederick County Public Schools. This is happening in school systems across the state, and we've already started conversations with our legislators about holding us harmless for enrollment declines this year. So that is something you're going to hear a lot more from us in encouraging our community to advocate for that kind of support, because there are going to be, as you know, critical needs we're going to have to address when we do bring our students back to the classroom. But that's enough from me. Now it is time to hear from you. As Heather indicated, we're asking that you call in to 301-696-6966 to share your ideas and suggestions for priorities. If you are going to respond in Spanish, please call 240-236-8769. I believe you can also email, and staff will be looking at that. And I'm going to now turn to Brandon Olin, who is our Manager of Communications, to start sharing with us some of the priorities we are hearing from our community.
Good evening, and thank you to everybody who has submitted feedback so far. While this is an important opportunity tonight, you can always email us if you have questions or concerns or feedback about the budget, fcps.budget@fcps.org. We're always eager and anxious to get your feedback, especially this year on the budget. Here's some of the feedback we've received so far this evening and leading up to the event itself. And there are some questions/comments. Please show COVID-19 grants or additional funding in the budget and share how the money will be used. Certainly this has been a complicated school year for everyone involved, so I'm sure that's where that is coming from. Teachers have been heroes throughout this process. We hope that they will receive all of the support that they need. Certainly that's been true throughout the pandemic. Our teachers have gone above and beyond to support students in a rapidly changing environment. Another piece of feedback we have is we hope that sufficient supplies remain available for cleaning and disinfecting and making sure that is a part of the budget. We've received some calls tonight. One caller mentioned that they would like to see the student-faculty ratios addressed in the budget, which makes sense, and that there should be added funding for tutoring due to virtual learning and students feeling left behind. And one of the questions that we've received both tonight and leading up to the budget has been what kind of cost savings, if any, we have incurred due to the buildings actually being closed and any other expenses that have there been savings that will help us in the long run? I guess that's a question we get an awful lot here in public affairs. So that's one question that we have, and that's the feedback we have so far.
Leslie, do you want to talk a little bit about that cost savings idea?
Certainly, and we've gotten several questions recently about cost savings and what cost savings have we encountered because of COVID and because of our small group instruction, not having all the students in the buildings. I will tell you from a utilities perspective, we have not seen as much saving as you might think because we are continuing to keep the airflow going in the buildings and whatnot, so we really haven't reduced the airflow or the dampers as they call them at the buildings, so there hasn't been that much change there. Where we have seen some savings is in things like substitute teachers. We've saved in that area because of course some of our teachers, they can work around appointments and whatnot. So that we haven't had that need. The other area we've saved money in, of course, is in fuel because we're not running as many buses on our roads. But again, with their savings, we've also had some additional costs, such as in our cleaning areas, our operations and maintenance areas. Those have been additional costs that we've had. So there's been some savings, and of course, any savings in an annual budget and our operating budget falls at the year end to our fund balance. And we use that money then the next year as a revenue source. And we normally run 1% to 2% of our budget each year is rolled in from one year to the next. So I do not anticipate a large increase in that fund balance for this year, but we're continuing to monitor this literally on a biweekly basis to see what those numbers are and to be able to help our board and our staff as we have unexpected costs that come up. If we return to school as we're anticipating at the end of January in our hybrid model, we know that there are going to be some costs that we encounter at that time. So any of these savings will help us hopefully address those needs as we move into the second half of this fiscal year. I did want to talk a little bit about the COVID funding and the grants funding that folks have asked about, and that's an excellent question, and it's very important in this day and time. We've received now a little over, I think it's $14 million now, both from our federal government and also from our local and our city governments have just recently announced that they gave us an additional $3 million in COVID relief funds. So we've used those from everything from PPE, personal protective equipment. We've used some for tutoring. I know someone mentioned that, and that's an extremely important thing. We've used a lot of monies for tutoring this fall to offer for our children. We've used it for technology. A lot of our funding has gone to technology for our students and for our teachers because that was much needed during this time. So those are many uses that we've been using that, and we do have some of that information we can post online. Heather, you had?
I can provide some additional details regarding the COVID-19 grants that we've received. During this time, I've put on an additional hat and I've been managing those grants. So it's been a very interesting foray into the grant world. We have, of the grants that Leslie spoke about $9 million worth of those grants end on December 30th, 2020. And that includes our tutoring grant. It also includes a technology grant and it includes the additional funds that we received from the county and city government. The tutoring grant has really been used to stand up an after-school tutoring program that has been running from September to December. We also have operating budget funds, non-grant funds, that will then continue that program through the remainder of the school year. It was also used for some summer programs. We did quite a few virtual programs at our elementary and middle school level this summer. And our technology grant was used predominantly to take our CTE classrooms virtual. As you might imagine, for a lot of the CTE programming, it's a much more significant than what you would do on a typical Chromebook, but our technology staff was able to pivot and make those classes available in a virtual environment. We use some of the county funds, like Leslie said, are being used for PPE. They're being used to support our food and nutrition services. Because even though students haven't been coming to school, we have been providing free meals. And it's not just lunch, it's breakfast, lunch, and a supper meal throughout the county, and not simply at our schools, but at some different sites. Then we also have two other grants that run through September of 2022. And one of those grants, it's referred to as the ESSER grant. It's going to be used for next summer, helping with students who need some additional assistance, academic recovery in the summer. That grant has also been used to help with our operations, buying additional masks. And so we've been able to, fortunately, use those funds to meet some, unplanned needs that have come up because of COVID. We're hoping, and if you watched our governor's press conference, I believe yesterday or the day before, he talked about federal funds. We're hoping that there will be additional federal funds. And this, again, to what Dr. Albin was speaking about regarding advocacy, now's the time to advocate for that with your state and federal representatives, because that has really helped us significantly. And it's been nice because we've been able to maintain our operating budget and provide additional resources without having to reach into our operating budget right now. Now, we don't know what the remaining of the winter and the spring will hold, but having some additional federal supports would be significant in assisting, because even as we look to 22, when hopefully our students are back in a traditional classroom setting, we don't know what learning loss we'll be facing. I mean, I'm the budget officer, so I don't spend a lot of time on the academic side of the house, but we've been discussing it, and I know that they're preparing for it, and having that additional infusion of cash can set us up to have the items that you need to provide for a student.
It sounds so far like we've gotten support at the county, state, and national level through this year, but there's some uncertainty going into next year about how much support we will be getting at all three different levels. Is that right?
Absolutely. And you think about, in your daily checkbook, a $15 million infusion would be amazing. But at FCPS, when your budget is $674 million, $15 million, while very helpful, is not as significant as an infusion. And so that's why we've been talking about hopefully having the need for more. Because, our students left the building on March 13th and have returned in some way, shape, or form, but only a few of them. And they now all have Chromebooks. And as you might imagine, a Chromebook in the hands of a youngster may or may not survive. And so there are costs that we've been looking at to think that, once they all come back, what will that cost me? And while Chromebooks are reasonably priced, when you need 45,000 of them, that's, a rather large price tag.
Two other pieces of feedback that we've received from the community just in the last 5 minutes. We would like to see resident substitutes continued in next year's budget. That was call-in that we got of importance. And also, more a comment than a suggestion. I would like to see the budget to reflect the impact of the recent closure at Sibyllesville Elementary. So we really appreciate everyone who's provided feedback tonight and throughout this process. We know it's not as easy as coming into the boardroom. Unfortunately, due to health protocols, we really are not yet at the point where we can welcome guests, but we are looking forward to doing that in the future, and your feedback will be critically important going forward as we form this budget and as we prepare for the next fiscal year. So I guess I'll share with Dr. Albin to see if you have any other feedback or anything else you'd like to say in regards to the budget.
I'd like to take one moment to reassure the person who about the resident sub program.
Yeah.
That actually was incorporated into our staffing formula. So that is recurring funding, and we will be continuing that throughout. And it's based upon the enrollment at the school, as well as whether the school, we refer to them as a Tier 1 or Tier 2 school. Our Tier 2 schools get some additional supports based upon a number of criteria, and it's based upon that. So it will continue, and it's a recurring budget item. So as long as we don't have to cut a recurring budget item, it will be continuing for the future.
Well, that is certainly good news.
I want to thank the community for the feedback and the suggestions you have shared. Over my years of doing the budget in Frederick County Public Schools, your commitment to supporting the hard work of our teachers and wanting to see that we take care of our teachers is consistent, and I think it's one of the reasons I love Frederick County. And the suggestion about student-teacher ratios and class size, I know that has been a priority for several years, and we've taken baby steps in that regard. But that staffing formula that Heather talked about, we do have a plan of where we ultimately want to go, and as we can afford to, we're taking steps along the way there. I also think it was wonderful that folks are really considering the impact of COVID on our students. And you talked about tutoring, you talked about academic needs, but we also know that there has been a social and emotional impact on children and even adults throughout this pandemic. And so one of the things that I know was a priority of our Board of Education, and frequently we hear from the community, is that concern about mental health. And more so than ever, when our students come back, at whatever point that is, we want to make sure that we have mental health professionals available in our buildings to help them as they move forward. And we have been providing mental health services with partners, but also with our own staff virtually for many of our students throughout the pandemic. And we recognize the critical importance of that, and I know that too has been a huge priority for our Board of Education. I'm glad that Leslie was able to unpack with folks some of the information about CARES funding and cost savings, because I think people assume that because we've got these additional grants, you got extra money. Well, we spent a lot of extra money on many, many things. The personal protective equipment, upgrading of cleaning supplies and materials, making sure we have enough available because we're going to go through things rapidly, adding hand sanitizer dispensers in every classroom, and the whole technology piece. We also did a lot of mobile hotspots because we had many students whose families' access to the internet was very limited, or there was no access at all. And when you think about equity, if you're doing a virtual learning environment, everyone needs access. And so being able to provide those kinds of services were not in our current budget, and were it not for that CARES funding, then we would have had to look at, well, what are we going to cut in order to make this happen? So we value and appreciate that funding. it helped us to offset additional costs that we were facing due to the COVID-19 pandemic. I think Heather offered great advice, and I forgot to mention federal level advocacy, because they will be taking a look at that. And I know that's a message Governor Hogan has sent as well, that as our state and county look at the impact on their budgets, any additional support from the federal government that they can then pass on to support us and many other small businesses who are struggling so much in this pandemic is very important. So definitely something we want to keep in mind with you. I kind of stalled a little bit there, Brandon, because I didn't know if any other feedback has come in, or, you know, everybody knew exactly what they wanted to say and we zipped through. It's a little hard when people aren't in front of you to know if comments and questions are done as opposed to virtually.
That's the feedback that we've gotten so far, but once again, I want to remind you that the community is always, if you have questions, concerns, feedback, we're always here to answer those questions, and we'll continue to do so throughout the budget process. But you can continue to send your feedback to fcps.budget@fcps.org. We check that email address all the time, and we'll be happy to provide any responses to, and be happy to take your suggestions as we begin the process of crafting this budget for the next fiscal year.
So then let's talk about what is it really going to be important for you to look for next, and that is January 11th, because that will be the night when the superintendent's recommended budget is released. That's where we take those revenues, that's where we take all of these priorities and requests and compile it, put it together, and share it with the community and our Board of Education. So please watch for that release on January 11th. Every board meeting in January and February will be about the budget. And so in addition to providing feedback at fcps.budget@fcps.org, you can also provide feedback to the Board of Education. You can listen to their conversations and their deliberation about the budget. Heather talked about that budget work session, and that is truly when you dig down into the nitty-gritty details of the budget. And as board members ask us questions, Heather's team posts every answer on the budget webpage. So that way the community can see everything that's going on. And again, if you haven't had a chance to check out the budget book, it's incredibly helpful, very user-friendly, and will give you a good understanding of what we're doing right now in FY21 and how that prepares us and launches us for FY22. I do want to thank again our budget team. This has been a challenging year. Many of the funds that have come our way have come with onerous reporting requirements. So when Heather so very lightly said, oh, and I'm also managing some grants, that's a lot of reporting, a lot of tracking, and a lot of monitoring. So in the midst of all of that, they're trying to help us now put together and prepare for our FY22 budget. So I want to thank both of you and the rest of your team for all the work there. I want to thank our Public Affairs Department. The challenge of trying to figure out how do you continue to engage your community when you can't be together. And their willingness to come, practically the whole department is here this evening, either behind the scenes or sitting here right now answering the phone calls and taking the messages. So I thank you for your innovative spirit in looking at ways that we can continue to let our community stay involved in this very, very important process. And again, I want to thank our interpreters. I hope we were slow enough for you tonight. I know sometimes we talk too fast. So thank you. We appreciate you. And to everyone who participated, community members who shared ideas, and if you didn't have a chance to call in tonight, or in the middle of the night you wake up with an incredible idea, grab your phone, send an email. We will continue to monitor and look at that. And to our new board member, Mr. Bass, maybe you're a good luck charm. These don't usually end this soon. But I think, again, just a slightly different format. But we really do thank you for your interest in wanting to come and kind of see how this process unveils. So with that, Brandon, is there anything else we need to know, or are we ready to say have a good evening to everyone?
One last piece of feedback that we received in the last couple of minutes, and appreciate everyone's patience as we go through this process. We would like to see additional efforts in next year's budget to make sure our teacher funding is on par with surrounding counties. That's a piece of feedback we just got in the last 5 minutes as we continue with tonight's forum.
And again, it just reinforces the support our community shows for our teachers and how much we appreciate that. All right, well, again, we thank you so much. This is just the beginning. Your engagement and your advocacy will be important all the way through May. So please keep watching, keep listening, keep sharing, and we will wish everyone, since we really won't come back to talk about the budget until January 11th, a wonderful holiday season. Please be smart, be safe, take care of yourselves, and we will see you in what we hope will be a far brighter 2021. Thank you very much.